The quiet surprise the ocean whispered softly as the sun began to rise, painting the horizon in shades of gold and pale pink. Keanu Reeves stood alone on the quiet beach, his shoes tucked in his hand, the cool sand brushing against his bare feet. It was early, too early for the usual crowd of families and travelers. He had chosen this moment carefully because he wanted the place to feel private, almost sacred. Today was not just another day. Today was Sandra Bullock's birthday, and he wanted to give her something she would never forget. Keanu had been planning in silence for weeks. He did not tell anyone, not even his closest friends, because this was not about headlines or public attention. It was about friendship, about gratitude, about the kind of bond that went deeper than words. The world saw them as movie stars, icons who had shared the screen, but beneath the glamour there was something simpler. They were two people who had carried each other through storms, heartbreaks, and victories. And now, Keanu wanted to remind Sandra that even after all the noise of Hollywood, she was never alone. As he stood there, he felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. He had arranged everything on this quiet stretch of sand. A small wooden table covered with a clean white cloth stood a few feet away. A basket of fresh fruits, simple flowers, and 2 candles waited silently. He had chosen not to make it grand or flashy. Instead, he wanted it to feel warm, humble, and full of meaning. It was not about expensive gifts. It was about presence, about the care behind each detail. He glanced at his watch. Sandra would arrive soon. She thought they were meeting for a casual morning walk, something they often did when their schedules allowed. But she did not know about the hidden surprise. Keanu smiled softly at the thought of her reaction. The sound of footsteps behind him broke his thoughts. He turned, and there she was. Sandra walked toward him, her hair tied loosely, her eyes still carrying the softness of morning. She wore no makeup, no glamour, just her natural self, glowing in the early sunlight. When she saw him, she smiled, unaware of what he had prepared. "You're here early," she said with a laugh, her voice calm and light. Keanu nodded, his lips curving into a gentle grin. "I wanted to make sure everything was ready." Sandra raised her eyebrow. "Everything?" Without a word, he took her hand and guided her toward the table. Her steps slowed as her eyes widened. When she saw the candles, the flowers, and the basket of fruit, she stopped. For a moment, she was silent, as if the world around her had frozen. "Keanu," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "What is this?" He looked at her with the same steady kindness that had always defined him. "It's your birthday, Sandra. I thought we could celebrate here, just the 2 of us, away from everything else. No cameras, no noise, just us." Her eyes filled with tears, not because of the table or the candles, but because of the thoughtfulness behind it. So many people in her life had tried to impress her with big gestures, expensive gifts, or public displays. But Keanu had chosen something different. He had chosen peace, sincerity, and the beauty of simplicity. They sat together, the sound of the ocean wrapping around them like a quiet song. For a while, they did not speak. They just listened to the waves and felt the sun warming their skin. When they finally began to talk, their words were not about Hollywood, not about work, not about fame. They spoke about life, about memories, about the challenges they had faced when no one was watching. "Do you ever feel," Sandra said slowly, "that the world only sees one version of us? The one on the screen, the one in magazines, but not the real us?" Keanu nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "All the time. That's why moments like this matter. Because here, we don't have to pretend. We can just be who we are." Sandra looked at him, her heart heavy with gratitude. She realized then that this birthday was already different. Not because of where she was, but because of who she was with. But just as the moment settled into peace, a sudden shift arrived. The sound of voices drifted from the distance. Two strangers walking their dogs along the shore were heading closer. Sandra's body tensed. She had been craving privacy, and she knew what could happen if someone recognized them. Keanu noticed her unease and placed his hand gently over hers. "It's all right," he whispered. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." The words struck her deeply. In that simple moment, she understood something about him that the world often missed. Behind his calm presence was not just kindness, but resilience. He had lived through storms of his own, and yet he still carried light for others. The strangers passed by, offering only polite smiles. They did not seem to notice who sat at the table. Sandra exhaled, relief flooding her chest. Keanu gave her hand a small squeeze, and she smiled through her tears. The birthday had only just begun, but already it carried more weight than she could have imagined. There was something about the beach, the silence, and Keanu's quiet strength that made her feel both grounded and lifted at the same time. And deep down, she knew this was only the start. The tide of memories, the waves grew stronger as the morning stretched into daylight, each one rolling in with a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. The ocean seemed alive, as if it too wanted to play a part in Sandra's birthday. Yet beneath the calm surface of the beach, something stirred, unspoken emotions, hidden memories, and the quiet tension of a day that was about to shift. Keanu watched Sandra as she leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The golden sunlight caught in her hair, making her look almost like a painting. For a long while, neither of them spoke, but the silence was not empty. It carried weight, like a pause before an unexpected storm. Then, Sandra broke it with a soft laugh. "You know, when I woke up this morning, I thought it would be just another birthday. Maybe a few calls, maybe a dinner somewhere crowded. But this..." She gestured toward the ocean, the table, and him. "This feels like something I never knew I needed." Keanu smiled faintly, his eyes carrying the calm of a man who had seen much and learned even more. "Sometimes the best moments are the ones we don't expect." She looked at him carefully, her expression shifting. "You always say things like that, but do you ever wonder if people see you the way you really are? Or do they just see the actor, the image?" His gaze dropped to the sand, and for a second, a shadow passed over his face. "They see what they want to see. Kindness, mystery, maybe sadness. But they don't know the full story. Not the losses, not the nights alone, not the weight you carry when the lights go out." Sandra felt her heart tighten. She had always admired his humility, but she also knew the pain behind his quiet nature. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "I see you, Keanu. Not the actor, not the icon, just you." His eyes met hers, and for a moment it felt like the world had gone still. But before the moment could settle, a sudden sound echoed from farther down the beach, a loud crash followed by raised voices. Sandra turned, startled. A group of young tourists had been playing near the rocks, and one of them had slipped. The boy, no older than 16, was clutching his leg, his cries carried by the wind. His friends panicked, shouting for help, but not knowing what to do. Without hesitation, Keanu rose from his seat. "Stay here," he said firmly, though his tone remained gentle. Sandra stood too, her instincts pulling her forward. "Keanu, wait!" But he was already running across the sand, his feet digging into the earth with steady determination. Sandra followed close behind, her heart pounding in her chest. When they reached the boy, Keanu knelt beside him. The boy's leg was scraped badly, bleeding where the sharp rocks had cut through the skin. His friends hovered helplessly, their voices trembling. "It's okay," Keanu said, his voice calm and steady. "Breathe. You're going to be all right." The boy looked up, his eyes wide with pain and surprise. It was as if the presence of Keanu himself familiar, kind, almost unreal, was enough to calm him. Sandra crouched beside them, taking off her light scarf. "We can wrap the wound with this until someone gets proper help." Keanu nodded gently, tying the fabric around the boy's leg. His hands were careful, deliberate, as though he had done this before. "We need to get him off the rocks," Sandra said, her voice tight with urgency. Keanu glanced at the friends. "Help me lift him, slowly, one step at a time." Together they carried the boy back toward the flat sand, laying him down near the edge of the waves where the breeze was soft and cooling. His cries had quieted, though his face was still pale. Sandra pulled out her phone, calling for help. Within minutes, a lifeguard appeared, rushing toward them with supplies. As the professionals took over, Keanu and Sandra stepped back. The boy's mother arrived shortly after, running with tears streaming down her face. She hugged her son tightly, then turned to Keanu and Sandra, her voice breaking. Thank you both. You don't know what this means to me." Keanu gave her a small, humble smile. Anyone would have done the same. But Sandra knew better. Not everyone would have. Many people might have hesitated or turned away, or thought it was someone else's responsibility. But Keanu had moved without a second thought, not for recognition, but because it was who he was. As they walked back to their little table, Sandra's mind was spinning. The day had already shifted. What had started as a quiet celebration now carried the weight of something bigger. She looked at Keanu with renewed admiration. "You never stop surprising me." He shrugged, brushing the sand from his hands. "Life gives us chances to show who we are. Today just happened to bring one." She studied him closely, feeling a swell of emotion in her chest. "Do you know what I think, Keanu? I think this day is going to change me. Maybe both of us. Because sometimes it's not the parties or the gifts we remember. It's moments like these. The ones that test us." He looked at her, his eyes soft, yet filled with a quiet strength. "Then maybe this birthday will be one you never forget." But deep inside, Sandra sensed something more was coming. This was not just about a birthday or a single act of kindness. The tide was turning, and the day was preparing to reveal truths neither of them expected. Shadows beneath the sunlight, the beach looked peaceful again, as though nothing had happened. The boy was safe, the lifeguards had taken him away, and his mother's tears had softened into relief. Yet for Sandra, the air felt different now. She sat quietly at the table, watching the waves dance under the rising sun, but her thoughts were tangled. She looked at Keanu, who had returned to his chair, brushing grains of sand from his arms. He seemed calm, almost unaffected. But Sandra knew better. His calmness was never emptiness. It was strength, built from years of enduring storms without letting them break him. She leaned forward, her voice low. "Keanu, why do you always run toward the pain instead of away from it? Even today you didn't hesitate. Most people would have frozen." He smiled faintly, his eyes glinting like the surface of the sea. "Because I know what it's like. When no one comes. Sometimes just one person stepping forward can change everything. I don't ever want someone to feel abandoned the way I once did." His words hit her hard, carving into the silence between them. Sandra had always admired him, but in that moment she felt something deeper, a pull of empathy, of wanting to understand the wounds he rarely spoke about. Before she could respond, the wind shifted. Dark clouds, unexpected and heavy, began rolling in from the far horizon. The blue sky started to fade into gray, and the gentle waves grew restless. Sandra glanced upward. Is this normal? It was so clear just an hour ago. Keanu followed her gaze, his expression tightening slightly. Storms come fast near the ocean. We should be careful. But the change in weather was not the only shift. As the first drops of rain tapped the sand, another sound reached them, faint but sharp. A voice calling out, they turned. Further down the shore, a man stood with a camera in his hands, his eyes locked on them, his movements quick and hungry. Paparazzi. Sandra's stomach dropped. She had been so grateful for the privacy of the morning, for the rare peace of being unseen. But now, in a heartbeat, it was slipping away. "Not today," she whispered, her voice almost breaking. "Not on my birthday, Keanu." The man raised his camera again, aiming it like a weapon. Sandra felt her heart pound in her ears. She imagined tomorrow's headlines. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock's secret beach meeting. People would twist it, tear it apart, make it something it wasn't. The moment that had felt so sacred could be turned into gossip. Keanu noticed her trembling. Without hesitation, he moved closer, his voice steady. "Look at me, Sandra. Not at him. Just me." She looked into his eyes, and for a second the panic eased. He continued, his tone quiet but unshakable. "We can't control the storm or the cameras or what people say, but we can control how we face it. Do you trust me?" Her throat tightened, but she nodded. "Always." Keanu stood, walking toward the photographer. Sandra's breath caught. She feared confrontation, feared the chaos it could bring. But Keanu didn't raise his voice, didn't show anger. Instead, he raised his hand gently, as if asking for a moment of peace. The photographer hesitated. Maybe it was the calmness in Keanu's posture, or the quiet firmness in his eyes. Keanu spoke in a low tone, just enough for the man to hear. "This is her birthday. Not a story, not a headline, just a day she deserves to keep for herself. Please." There was silence, only the roar of the ocean behind them. For a moment, Sandra thought the man would laugh and keep snapping, but something shifted. Perhaps even the photographer felt the weight of sincerity in Keanu's words. Slowly, he lowered the camera. He gave a half nod, almost reluctant, then turned and began walking away. Sandra exhaled shakily, pressing her hand to her chest. She had not expected that outcome. Kindness had disarmed what anger could have fueled. As Keanu returned, the first drops of rain turned into a heavier drizzle. The storm was coming faster now. "We should find shelter," Keanu said, his voice calm but urgent. They gathered their few things, the basket, the candles, the flowers, and began walking along the beach. But as the rain fell harder, the sand grew slippery. The tide was rising, rushing further inland, swallowing the footprints they left behind. "There's a small hut near the edge of the rocks," Sandra said, pointing. "I saw it earlier when we arrived." Together, they pushed, through the wind and rain until they reached the weathered hut. Inside, it smelled of salt and wood, but it was dry. They set down their things and sat close, their clothes damp, their breaths unsteady. The storm raged outside, lightning flashing across the darkened sky, thunder rolling like an angry drum. Sandra hugged her knees, her voice trembling. "Funny, isn't it? How quickly things change. One moment it's peace, the next it's chaos." Keanu's gaze lingered on the storm. "That's life. Storms remind us that nothing stays the same. But storms also pass. They always do." She turned to him, her eyes shimmering. "But do you ever get tired of always being the one who stays calm, who carries everyone else's fear?" His lips curved into a sad smile. "Sometimes. But if I can give even one person a little peace, it's worth it." Her chest ached with emotion. She realized that the world admired Keanu for his kindness, but few understood the cost of carrying such calmness. It was not effortless. It was resilience. Born from pain, the thunder cracked again, shaking the hut. Sandra leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For giving me a birthday I'll never forget. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. raw, human. Keanu looked at her, and for the first time that day, his calm broke into a soft laugh. "We haven't even had cake yet." She laughed too, and the sound, though fragile, cut through the storm. Yet even as they shared that small moment of joy, both of them felt it deep inside. This day was still far from over. The storm outside was only a reflection of something greater, brewing between them, unspoken truths, hidden emotions, and choices waiting to be made. Truths in the storm, the rain slammed harder against the fragile wooden hut, each drop echoing like a drumbeat of tension. Lightning cracked across the sky, flashing for an instant and then leaving behind a deeper darkness. The ocean roared so loud that it drowned out even the sound of their breaths. Sandra sat close to Keanu, her shoulders trembling slightly, though she wasn't sure if it was from the cold or from the storm inside her chest. The hut was small, barely big enough for the two of them, and the nearness made every moment heavier. She broke the silence first, her voice soft but raw. "You know, Keanu, people always think birthdays are about gifts, parties, or candles, but today, this feels more like a mirror, like life is forcing me to look at everything I've been running from." Keanu tilted his head, his eyes fixed on her with quiet patience. "What are you running from?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to brush it off, to laugh, to keep the daylight. But the storm outside felt like it was pushing her deeper, pulling her words out like tides pulling shells to shore. "Loneliness," she whispered finally. "Everyone thinks I have everything. Success, fame, a career people dream about. But at night, when the lights go out, I still feel this emptiness. Sometimes I wonder if people love me for who I am, or just for the person they think I am. And on days like birthdays, that emptiness feels heavier." Keanu listened, his expression steady but his eyes heavy with understanding. "I know that emptiness," he said quietly. "It's like a shadow that follows you no matter how bright the spotlight is. People see the success, the movies, the red carpets, but they don't see the silence after, the nights alone, the grief that lingers." Sandra's eyes softened, tears threatening to spill. "Keanu, how do you carry it so gracefully? I've watched you over the years. No scandals, no loud defenses, no bitterness. You just walk through it." "How?" His gaze shifted to the flicker of the candle they had lit earlier. It fought against the storm, its flame trembling but refusing to die. "Because I believe every storm, no matter how strong, eventually passes. And because I know kindness is the one thing that makes the weight lighter, not just for me but for others too." Her breath caught because in that moment she understood. His calmness wasn't just for himself, it was his gift to the world. Before she could respond, thunder roared, so loud that the wooden walls shook. Sandra flinched, instinctively grabbing his arm. Keanu didn't move away. Instead, he placed his hand gently over hers, steadying her. "We're safe here," he said softly. But just as his words settled, the storm gave them another twist. The door of the hut rattled violently, then burst open with the force of the wind. Rain poured inside, drenching the floor. Keanu stood quickly, pushing the door closed again with all his strength. The storm fought back, slamming against him, but he leaned with steady force, his body pressed against the wooden frame. Sandra rushed to help, her hands against the door, her hair plastered to her face from the rain. Together, they shoved until, finally, the door gave in and stayed shut. Both of them staggered back, soaked and breathless. Sandra looked at him, a shaky laugh escaping her lips. "Is this what birthdays are supposed to feel like? Survival training?" Keanu laughed too, the sound warm and grounding even against the chaos. "Maybe the universe wanted to give you a story you'll never forget." Her laughter faded into silence, replaced by something heavier, deeper. She looked at him, her heart pounding, not from the storm, but from everything unspoken between them. Keanu, she said slowly, her voice trembling, can I tell you something I've never said out loud before? His eyes met hers, patient, inviting. Always, she hesitated, the words sitting on her tongue like a secret too fragile to release. But the storm outside pushed her forward, reminding her that nothing lasts forever, not even silence. When I look back at my life, she began, her voice breaking, the happiest memories aren't the awards, or the red carpets, or the big roles. They're small moments, like filming with you, laughing in between takes, feeling safe because you were there. I never told you this, but those moments saved me more than once. Keanu's expression shifted, his calm breaking into raw emotion. For the first time, Sandra saw the vulnerability in his eyes, something he usually hid behind gentleness. He exhaled slowly. Sandra, do you know how many times I wanted to tell you the same? That your presence, your laughter, even your stubbornness, it carried me when I thought I couldn't go on. But I stayed silent. Maybe because I thought the world would twist it, or maybe because I didn't think I deserved to say it. The air between them grew heavy, charged like the storm outside. Sandra's tears finally spilled, her chest aching with both relief and fear. So all this time, she whispered, we were carrying the same weight but too afraid to share it? Keanu nodded, his voice low. Maybe today was meant to break that silence. They sat in the trembling hut, the storm raging outside, but for the first time neither of them felt alone. The walls shook, the wind howled, yet inside there was a fragile peace, a truth spoken, a bond deepened. Sandra leaned closer, her voice steady despite the tears. If storms are what it takes to bring out the truth, then maybe storms aren't curses. Maybe they're blessings. Keanu looked at her, and for the briefest moment, a soft smile curved his lips. Maybe this storm is the real gift the universe gave you today. And as thunder cracked above them, Sandra realized her birthday had turned into something far greater than a celebration. It had become a turning point, one where truth, kindness, and vulnerability collided in a way that would change both of them forever. The test of the tide, the storm had been raging for hours, now hammering the little hut with all its might. Thunder cracked like the sky itself was splitting open, and the waves outside crashed with a violence that made the ground tremble. Inside, Keanu and Sandra sat close, their breaths shallow, their clothes damp, their hearts still heavy from the truths they had shared. The candle between them flickered, its flame struggling against the drafts that sneaked through the cracks of the wooden walls. Sandra stared at it, her voice low. It feels like the world is testing us today, like it doesn't want us to just sit here in peace. First the boy, then the photographer, now this storm. It's almost too much for one day. Keanu studied her carefully, his eyes calm yet firm. Maybe it's not a test, Sandra. Maybe it's a reminder that life is unpredictable, that even when the world feels against us, we still have the choice to hold on to kindness, to stay steady. His words gave her strength, but before she could respond, another sound tore through the noise of the storm, a cry. Faint at first, but sharp enough to cut through the roar of the waves. Sandra froze. Did you hear that? Keanu's head turned, his body tense. The cry came again, louder this time. It wasn't the wind and it wasn't the storm. It was a human voice, desperate, broken. Without hesitation, Keanu stood. Someone's out there. Sandra's heart raced. But it's dangerous. The waves... He looked at her, his expression steady but urgent. I can't ignore it. Stay here. I'll go. But Sandra shook her head fiercely, rising to her feet. No. If you're going, I'm going too. You won't face this storm alone. Their eyes met, the weight of shared determination binding them together. They pushed the door open, and the storm greeted them with full force. Rain lashed against their faces, the wind tearing at their clothes, the sand stinging their skin. The world was chaos, but through it all, the cry came again, guiding them. They followed the sound toward the rocks at the far end of the beach. The tide had risen dangerously, swallowing the shore. Lightning flashed, illuminating the figure of a woman clinging to the jagged rocks. Her arms trembled, her body soaked, her voice hoarse from screaming. "Help me!" she cried, her voice breaking. Sandra gasped. "She'll be pulled under if we don't reach her!" Keanu's face hardened. With determination, he turned to Sandra. "Stay back on the dry sand. I'll pull her out." But Sandra grabbed his arm, her eyes fierce. "No, we do this together." The waves crashed with merciless force as they made their way forward. Keanu stepped into the tide first, his body steady even as the water surged around his legs. Sandra followed, her heart pounding with fear, but her resolve stronger than ever. "Hold on!" Keanu shouted to the woman. "Don't let go! We're coming!" The woman's eyes were wide with terror, her fingers bleeding as they clutched the sharp rock. Keanu moved closer, every step a battle against the raging water. Sandra kept pace, her hand gripping his arm whenever the tide threatened to pull her down. Together they reached the woman, and Keanu stretched out his hand. "Take it!" he yelled. The woman's fingers slipped once, twice, before finally locking onto his. Keanu pulled with all his strength, his muscles straining while Sandra wrapped her arms around his waist, anchoring him against the pull of the sea. With one final surge, they dragged the woman free from the rocks, stumbling back onto the sand. The three of them collapsed, gasping for breath, the storm raging around them. The woman sobbed, her voice shaking. "Thank you. I thought I was going to die. I thought no one would come." Keanu's voice was calm, though his chest heaved with exhaustion. "You're safe now. That's what matters." Sandra brushed the wet hair from the woman's face, her own tears mixing with the rain. "You're not alone anymore." They led her back to the hut, supporting her trembling body between them. Inside, the candle still burned, its flames stubborn, against the storm. They wrapped the woman in the dry cloth they had left, her sobs slowly turning into quiet breaths. Sandra looked at Keanu, her eyes wide with awe. "You didn't even hesitate. Again. Keanu, how do you always stay so steady, even when everything is falling apart?" He met her gaze, his voice low but firm. "Because if I falter, someone else suffers, and I can't let that happen. Not if I can help it." The words sank deep into her, stirring something raw and powerful. She realized then that Keanu's life had always been built on resilience, not the loud kind that demanded applause, but the quiet kind that saved lives when no one was watching. The woman, now calmer, whispered softly, "People like you. You remind the world there's still good in it." Sandra's chest tightened with emotion. She turned to Keanu, her voice breaking. "Maybe that's your real gift, not the roles, not the fame, but the way you keep proving, again and again, that kindness is stronger than any storm." Keanu said nothing, but the look in his eyes told her everything. And as the storm continued outside, Sandra knew this day was no longer just about her birthday. It had become something far greater, a day of truth, resilience, and the quiet heroism that only Keanu could carry with such humility. The calm after the storm. The night was falling slowly, though the storm had not yet fully let go. Outside, the ocean still roared like an untamed beast, but its strength was beginning to fade. The worst had passed. The little hut still stood, battered but unbroken, and inside it, three souls rested together, bound not by blood, not by fame, but by a day that had tested every edge of their strength. The rescued woman lay curled in a blanket, her breathing steadier now, her tears finally.
Quiet.
She had spoken little after being pulled from the tide, but her eyes had carried gratitude so deep it needed no words. Sandra sat beside her, her hand resting gently on the woman's arm. She looked at Keanu, who sat across from them, his posture. Calm, though, his body showed signs of exhaustion. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, his knuckles raw from the sharp rocks, his hair still damp. But his eyes, as always, carried that steady light, quiet, unshakable. "You should rest," Sandra whispered to him. Keanu shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'll rest when the storm is gone. For now, I just want to make sure we're all safe." Sandra's chest ached. She wanted to tell him everything she felt, that she admired him, that she was grateful, that this day had changed her forever. But the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she let silence speak for her. After a while, the rescued woman stirred, her voice hoarse. "Why did you do it? Why risk yourselves for me? You don't even know me." Keanu leaned forward, his tone calm but full of meaning. "Because no one should ever be left behind. Not in a storm, not in life. It doesn't matter if we've just met. Kindness is not about who deserves it. It's about giving it anyway." The woman's eyes welled again, but this time with something softer. She whispered, "People like you. You remind me that the world still has hope." Sandra's hand tightened around the woman's. Her heart swelled because she knew the truth of those words. Outside, the storm finally began to fade. The thunder grew distant, the rain softened into a mist, and the waves calmed into a rhythm that no longer threatened, but comforted. The air felt lighter, as if the earth itself was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. Keanu stood, opening the hut's door. The night sky revealed itself, clouds parting to show the first stars blinking above. The beach was soaked, but the air smelled fresh, cleansed. "Come," Keanu said gently. "Let's step outside." Together they walked onto the sand, their feet sinking into the damp earth. The rescued woman leaned on Sandra for strength, but her steps were steady. The ocean glittered under the moonlight, no longer wild, but serene. It was as if the storm had been nothing but a lesson, leaving behind only clarity. Sandra looked up at the sky, the stars shining brighter than she had seen in years. She felt something stirred deep inside her, a release, a freedom. "Today was supposed to be my birthday," she said softly. "But it became something else. It became a reminder that life is fragile, unpredictable, but also beautiful, because even in the middle of storms, there are moments that save us." Keanu turned to her, his expression unreadable at first. Then, slowly, he spoke. "Maybe that's the gift the world gave you today, Sandra. Not candles, not cake, but truth. The truth that storms reveal who we are, and who stands with us when everything shakes." Her eyes burned with tears, but this time, they were not heavy with loneliness. They were filled with something lighter, warmer. She stepped closer to him, her voice trembling but steady. "Then let me say this truth too. Keanu, you gave me the most meaningful birthday of my life. Not because of the beach, not because of the table, not even because of saving lives, but because you reminded me what matters most: kindness, courage, and not facing storms alone." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of the gentle waves. Then Keanu's lips curved into that familiar, soft smile. "Happy birthday, Sandra," he whispered. The rescued woman, still leaning on Sandra, looked at the two of them with quiet wonder. "Maybe the storm wasn't an accident," she said. "Maybe it came so that you both could discover this truth together." The words hung in the air like a blessing. The three of them stood there, the storm behind them, the ocean calm before them, the stars above watching silently. And in that moment, Sandra knew this day would live in her memory forever. Not as the day the weather tried to break them, but as the day kindness proved stronger than any wave, any thunder, any shadow. The storm had tested them. The storm had pushed them to their limits. But the storm had also given them something priceless, the courage to face their truths, and the reminder that no one is ever truly alone when kindness is shared.